Welcome back to Trinidad and Tobago, and we are continuing our conversation on Petrotrin and the OWTU and the plans for the energy sector. Now, the Energy Chamber is quoted in one of the newspapers today as saying that they are concerned. Petrotrin is a flagship company within the energy sector, but let's also look at the finances. There's an $850 million bond. There are also other debts which are owed. So let's say $1 billion. Every year, according to the government, almost $1 billion in the red. And 50% of the total cost of running this entity is as a result of wages and salaries. Classic turnaround will tell you, cut the fat. And after the diagnostic was performed, the refinery was the fat. Well, joining us now on set, we have David Abdullah and also Carolyn Sipsad-Bechan, former energy minister. They're going to share their views on what's taking place. Now, successive administrations have been accused of being part of the equation that resulted in tremendous losses. This morning, both individuals will state what and why things were done. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Mr. Sipsad-Bechan, let me start with you. Successive governments have been accused of not acting on Petrotrin and that their inaction resulted in a situation that the PNM had to correct. Your thoughts on yesterday's announcement?
Well, first of all, in terms of yesterday's announcement, some of the reasons given for the closure of the refinery in particular, I'm not sure how they arrived at that being the basis for the closure. I think, first of all, I would like to say I think the time has come for us to have full disclosure on the various studies that were done. I mean, I know that there was a Lashley report. I know that there was a McKenzie report. I think there was a Solomon report as well. And if it is that these reports, the findings from these reports, support this particular option of closure of the refinery, the people of Trinidad and Tobago need to know. My concern starting off with this is that I don't think this particular option has been fully thought out. For example, I hear a lot about the debt payments. Yes, we understand the debt payment. We knew that this debt payment was coming due in 2019. But you know, when we are going to analyze and make a decision going forward, we cannot look backwards. Yes, there were several cost overruns on this particular project, and you know, in terms of the gas optimization project. And yes, there have been wastage. There has been
We're going to go to the 7 o'clock news. When we come back, we'll pick up on this point with Ms. Sipsad-Bechan. Stay with us. Who is to blame and how can we fix it? Welcome back to Trinidad. We are continuing our discussion. Ms. Sipsad-Bechan, I was asking the fact that successive administrations have been accused of inaction in relation to Petrotrin, and they've been accused of mishandling one of the most valuable assets of the state. Decision was made yesterday. Alison West said it had to be made in the interest of the country.
No one is saying a decision was not required. We all knew it was not going to be business as usual. We have been preparing for some sort of action. However, was this the best option? Closure of the refinery and getting rid of 1,700 workers, is this the best option? Yesterday, I noted that the board indicated that 3 options were provided. The first one is not an option, really. The second one, where they talked about a scale-down operation of the refinery and the E&P operations. And I wondered why that option was not considered. There's an issue that I would like to raise, because before I raise that issue, let me say there was the McKinsey report, I think, the Solomon report, and the Lashley report. These reports, I want to understand, and I'm asking the government today, were these reports responsible, or did they specifically recommend that this was the best option for Trinidad and Tobago?
I asked the minister that. I said, where, because obviously it didn't come out of the last report. She said a number of reports have been, and it came as a result of the best option. In the refinery itself, she said after they examined all of the options, the fact is the refinery was losing money in every option presented, and in getting rid of the fat was the only way to sustain a cash flow.
Okay, so if that is the case, and that there were these reports, and I'm understanding it may have been the McKinsey report or the Solomon report, since it was not the last report.
It was not in the last report.
Then let us have full disclosure of those reports to get the findings, because I am not understanding. First of all, we hear that you are going to stop the bleeding. One of the reasons, the rationale given, is because of this debt payment next year. When we are looking forward and we are trying to analyze a situation, we have to understand, and government has to understand, when we are dealing with public sector companies, such as Petrotrin, the wider implications for the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. So first of all, sometimes it's not just about fixing a balance sheet, which is what I'm seeing here that is coming out. They're attempting to fix a balance sheet and not necessarily fix the economy. So, for example, if I take this issue of the thoughts that went behind it or the findings, did we, for example, if you are going forward, you already have a debt, is it possible that the company is going to generate funds tomorrow morning to pay that debt in June next year or August?
I did ask the minister that, and she said they presented plans.
I doubt that. I doubt that
But
very
you also
much.
remember you no longer have the wages and salaries, which according to the parliamentary sittings account for 50% of Petrotrin's costs.
And if you look at the accounts themselves, the 2017 accounts, I'm looking here, because you see, when we look at what we're talking about, we have to look at the wider implications for the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. We are not just talking about 1,700 people. You're talking probably about another 1,000 casual workers. We're talking another 1,500 in service companies. We're talking about the contractors. We're talking about medical services. We're talking about IT services. All of these other areas, almost 20,000 people receive medical services from Petrotrin. What is going to happen to all of these families? My concern is that when we are speaking to this issue, I am not sure that we have taken the broader approach as opposed to just looking at the balance sheet. And if we look at the balance sheet of this company, I was looking at this morning, have we taken, for example, into consideration, this is what I'm saying, the wider economy, have we taken into consideration the cost of importing fuels into this country?
I did ask that, and she said they did the cash flows, and it's going to be significantly less because all they are going to be importing is what is needed for domestic consumption.
25,000
yes.
barrels of oil, and just think about the cost of aviation, for running our airlines, our airport, what is going to happen to the Caribbean market, what will happen to aviation in Barbados as well. My concern in this issue, again, is that have we taken all of this into consideration before choosing this as the best option? When you shut down an entire refinery and you take down many of the service companies, the energy service companies, what are the implications for the economy? 1,700 people go on the breadline. What was there? Because you're saying, yes, there were wages. And I think I worked it out somewhere probably, yes, a couple $100 million in terms of taxes, corporation taxes, that will now be deprived of, the government will deprive of that revenue.
Now, I want to bring David into the conversation. David, the population believes that Petrotrin was a drain on the economy. We can agree that the company was not performing and the decision needed to be made.
Right. And a lot of false information and lies and fake news. So Petrotrin was not a drain on the economy. Now, let me make it very clear. So between 2011 and 2015, Petrotrin contributed $20 billion in tax revenue to this country. $20 billion. Only two other companies probably contributed more, BPTT and NGC in that period. So $20 billion contribution in 5 years is not a drain on the economy. That was a huge injection. So everybody in this country who has a job through the government...
20 billion in 5 years?
Yes.
Okay.
In 5 years. As I said, between 2011 and 2015, over $20 billion in tax revenue was contributed.
And what happened from 2015 to now?
It has not been able to do that. So the company has been in trouble for a long time. The union made presentations. Let me just say, not because Karen is sitting down next to me that I'm saying this, but for the first year of the partnership government when she was Minister of Energy.
But you were also part of the partnership government as well?
And I helped to facilitate discussions at that time because I was a General Secretary of the Union as well and as a Senator. And we sat down, the President General of the Union, Mrs. C. Prasad Bechan, myself, and then a team was set up, a joint tripartite team, company, union, and management to increase oil production, and oil production began to increase. When she left, that whole thing fell apart. And for 4 years after that, oil production in Petrotrin fell.
So Kevin Ramrine resulted in bad decisions at Petrotrin?
Yes, yes. And let me say, too, that the Manning government before that put the company in the hole with the huge debts of which have not been able to be paid off through the
and we're talking about the three big projects that failed,
right? 4 big projects. Yes. World GTL, which failed, the ultra-low sulfur diesel plant, which up to now can't be started, and another $200 million US has to be spent to get it going, which obviously what they decided to do is not to do that.
Right, and David, we have identified these,
yes.
We can admit...
And the union, but the point I'm making is the union has been making the point repeatedly over more than a decade that the company was in trouble and needed to be addressed in a different way. That is what the Lashley Committee agreed with,
right.
That the fundamental problem is in fact the governance arrangements, the fact that governments come in and mess around with the company and therefore do not allow the company to operate as a business. So you had to fix the governance arrangements before trying to address anything else. And members of the Lashley Committee, we have to call them out. Wilfred Espinay, Selwyn Lashley are members of the board.
And you also sat on that committee, did you know?
Yes,
right.
And I was asked to be a member of the board, and I refused because I said, and I could read out the text message conversation between myself and the Prime Minister, where I said that unless the board appointment was going to be consistent with the recommendations of the Lashley Committee, I was not going to accept.
Yeah, but any board has a right to accept recommendations or not. If a committee makes a report, you don't have to wholeheartedly accept the report.
No, you don't have to wholeheartedly. But the very same people who sat down and drafted this and signed off on this are the very same people who have dissed this. And that to me is, so we had before us the 2016 McKinsey report. We had before us the 2016 Solomon report for R&M. Those are the same people that brought back in 2018. They would come up with no different analysis from 2016 to 2018. I'm aware that one of those companies, McKinsey or one of them, met with the union and presented some findings, and the union challenged it. I was in the meeting, and they had to admit that some of the findings were not, would not hold. They only hold given certain assumptions.
Okay, so you would have preferred if the government said what? Let's keep the refinery, let's continue as it is, and let's be business as usual.
Not to continue as is, and we never said to continue as is. Quite clearly what had to happen is that the report said, the last report said that there is no company in the world that operates an integrated oil company from exploration and production through to refining, marketing, and so on, with a single management structure, because you don't have the right skill set to be able to manage across that range of complex decision-making. And you lose accountability in that process. And therefore, what the recommendation was to split it into different business units where the management could be held accountable and focused on particular things. Secondly, there would have to be a certain restructuring because the company is top-heavy. Successive political regimes have put people in place so that the company has become top-heavy, which has shifted the cost structure away from the people engaged in productive activities to administrative activities that are not producing. And let me make the point that the total operating cost of the company is not 50% comprised of wages and salaries. In the refinery, it might be close to that.
She said 50% of total cost, so she didn't say operating.
That is not correct. That is not correct. And the audited financial statements say that. In the refinery, you may have a higher percentage of because the refinery's operating costs are much lower, okay, in terms of other activities and so on, utilities, et cetera, maintenance and so on. Your wage and salary bill in the refinery might be relatively higher, but overall as a company is not 50%. So let me make that clear. And let me also say that people without a vision who take action result in a nightmare. And this is what it is, a nightmare. This government has absolutely no vision, and Espinay and they have absolutely no vision for the company, because by what they're doing, and their sister-in-law who was just here, when she said, it's a fact, I'm just saying it by their sister-in-law, that when she said was not impacting on the trade union, that is a lie. Because the model that is being proposed is that every single worker in Petrotrin, 3,500, would be severed, and then people would then have to reapply for 800 jobs in E&P and 200 in terminaling. What that will mean is that the bargaining units disappear, and therefore it is a frontal attack as well. The union hasn't said so, I'm saying so. It's a frontal attack to get rid of the oilfields workers trade union in the oil industry.
Well, that's a pretty strong statement.
And that is Espinay's position, because Wilfred Espinay was president of the Manufacturers Association in the 80s. Okay. And go back and read what his union-busting statements were in the 80s.
Before we go back to the competition, let me just, but when the OWTU stands up, right, at a time when we are looking to get FDI, when our foreign reserves are down, and says, take your platform and go, do you think the OWTU has partnered with the people of Trinidad and Tobago to move this country forward?
The statement by Roger has been misinterpreted in many ways. The platform decision had already gone. BPTT said they were not going to fabricate the platform in Trinidad, okay? And it was at that point that Roger said, well, if that is your behavior, then take it and go. That was the statement. Because what he was saying is that, in effect, companies like BPTT have no interest in the well-being of Trinidad and Tobago. They make purely commercial decisions and so on. They have no interest in value added. And so that was what his statement was. It was a rhetorical statement, but it was not, that statement did not cause BPTT to not fabricate. They had already decided not to fabricate.
We will disagree on this one.
Go and check the facts. Fact check it, Kema. Fact check it.
Let me ask, I know Carol wanted to look at the finances, because in the end, the people of Trinidad and Tobago believe that there is we see an $850 million bond. We also know that there is
And who's going to pay that? Who's going to pay that? The same Petrotrin that can't pay it now is going to pay it now?
That's what the minister said. I asked that question.
When you're looking
they can't do it. It has not been thought through. Let me just interrupt.
Sure.
It has not been thought through. Yesterday, when the union, I wasn't in the meeting, but Roger came and reported, when the union asked Espinay and the others certain questions they could not answer. Who is going to import the fuel? Where is it coming from? They don't know. How are you going to deal with this? They don't know. What about that? They don't know. They don't know.
Maybe they won't bail these plans because of the fact that...
No, they don't know. It was not thought out.
I cannot imagine a company taking a turnaround activity or beginning a diagnostic without knowing the answers to these questions.
Yes, because some people, that is a simple thing. That is how some business people think. You just close it down and get rid of the problem. If we lose Petrotrin, which is a more than $20 billion company, GDP is what, 180 billion? Okay, so Petrotrin is what, 10% of our GDP. You significantly knock off a significant part of our GDP. You know what happens to the debt to GDP ratio? It goes up.
Okay,
and the government will still have to end up guaranteeing that bullet payment next year.
If you, in the end, have a company that's now making profits and a company that's been able to turn around, will we not boost GDP in terms of the numerator aspect of it because we have more activity being generated?
No, because you're talking about 160,000 barrels of refined products coming out of the refinery, which Petrotrin will not get up to 160,000 barrels, or EMP company afterwards cannot get up to 160,000 barrels of oil a day for another 25 or 30 years.
And I know Carolyn wanted to add something.
No, I'm looking at the financial statements of 2017, okay? And as I said, if we are going forward, you're taking a decision today. You cannot look backwards. And that is my problem with this. You have a debt. Going forward and closing the refinery, how does the closure of the refinery help you to pay that debt next year?
Because it was draining money, because they said it was losing money if you look at the analysis of the 3 units.
So what is it that you're saving to put towards this debt next year? What is it that you're saving by closing the refinery? You see, my concern is if you look at the finances, yes, you're seeing huge losses, but the huge losses are coming from the financing costs. If you look at what the operating losses are saying something like, let's say for, I just had it here, an operating loss of 681. All right? So it's not the 1 point something billion dollars in losses is because of that financing cost being carried on your balance sheet. So let us be very clear on that. When you look at $681 million as an operating loss to the refinery, and you now look at what you have to pay in terms of the wider economy, in terms of the importation of fuel, and we still don't know the impact on that on the pumps, whether we'll have to remove the subsidy.
I did ask about that, and she said no decision has been made on that, but every government, including the government that you sat on, spoke of the fact that the subsidy needed to be tinkered with, removed, and eventually
that is a policy decision that you have been taking, and you have been gradually reducing the subsidy and putting alternatives in place. So that's a separate issue. But what I'm saying is it costs to the government in importing. And you know what I want to ask this morning? We're talking about importing refined products. Was there a deal made, or did the government have some discussions? I asked the question. Did the government have some discussions with PDVSA in terms of importation of refined products into this country? Because, this is, suddenly we hear that the only option available is the closure of this plant. So I'm saying...
If you were still as Minister of Energy, Ms. Prasad-Bechan, would you have continued with this plant in its current form?
Not in the current configuration, and I'm coming back to the points being made. We're talking about what is it that we have to remove in terms of the Petrotrin itself, is that operating loss. We cannot remove the financing cost. That is already there. It's a sunk cost. We already have non-payment of taxes, $3.2 billion. That cannot be removed. It's still not going to be paid, whether with a reconfigured Petrotrin or not. But going forward, and I thought the attempt was being made to restructure the company, improve the efficiencies, cut out the wastage, cut out the overtime.
But we don't know if those things are going to be done.
Let me just show you again, because if you look at the financial statements, and I'm going to take you back to a statement that the chairman himself made. I heard him recently at a seminar stating that the company itself started turning around. They started seeing an improvement in their cash flows. Their profitability started improving. And in fact, if you look at the 2017 operating loss, it was 681.
Right, you cited it.
Compared to 2016, which was 808. So when I saw that, I thought to myself, well, probably some of the initiatives that they were discussing that came out of the Lashley report in terms of improving the efficiency of the...
They also cut operating costs because they renegotiated contracts with service providers.
Fine, and
that was put out in the public.
And that is
20% reduction
and that
on
is
service
part
providers.
of your restructuring in terms of improving your efficiency, how you improve your procurement processes, how you reduce the cost of your support services, how you...
corruption.
Well, corruption, and that has been no, but let's be real. The entity that exists of Petrotrin has, under successive administrations, including the one that you both were part of, and David, I'm saying because you were part of the partnership administration, they have all used Petrotrin as a political football. Mismanagement, no project management skills. It has been used as political patronage.
That's why I left the government.
And it's been filled with political appointees.
And that's why I left the government.
You know, I didn't want to get down into this particular issue, but, you know, David, you brought it up.
Yeah, but we can't shy away from the fact that that is what Petrotrin was known to be, a reward for political
And I don't
political
agree with
patronage.
that, because as Minister of Energy at that point in 2010 to 2011, everyone would recall that I left Petrotrin on its own. We formed our committees, as you would recall, the tripartite committees. We started seeing a boost in production. We put initiatives in place to be able to start restructuring Petrotrin to make it a leaner in terms of management, in terms of efficiencies, in terms of energy conservation in Petrotrin, to reduce the cost. Because the problem
but you
with
left
this...
in 2011, Mr.
Right,
Pisal.
right.
She was removed.
Right.
You're making the correction. Left versus removed. Okay.
Yes. And there's a question, why was that done?
And you will never find at any point in time that there was any political interference. I said competence only for this company if we are going to make it a success, which we intended to do in terms of how we were even making provision for the repayment of that debt in 2019.
You both seem to say, and I know we have to take a quick break, but you don't believe that this was the best turnaround plan. My question, if not this, then what? And if not now, then when?
Okay, sure.
Sure. After the break.
After the break.
Thank you.
We are continuing this conversation. $850 million bond due, $3.5 million in outstanding taxes. A company in which wages and salary scale is a bit out of whack with similar companies. But let me also say that no other company exists with a Petrotrin model. I'm going to put that. There are companies that exist in the energy sector, but if you compare in some scales, and we look at the salary scales, Petrotrin wages, according to the reports, have been out of alignment with industry practice.
Not true.
Are we going to, how do we make this company efficient? Are we now blaming workers for years and decades of mismanagement?
Let me just state the facts, right? If you take a person operating in a process plant in Point Lisas as an operator, a permanent worker in terms of maintenance and so on, the wages and salaries of those persons are comparable to Petrotrin. In fact, they sometimes are higher. If you take workers on offshore platforms like BP, full-time permanent workers, I'm talking about labor supply workers now, who are doing rig work and so on, the wages are higher than Petrotrin workers, or certainly comparable. So industry standards, you have to compare oranges and oranges, or don't compare Petrotrin workers with a labor supply contractor who is underpaying the workers, okay? Okay. Right, fine. So let's just deal with that.
I'm not going to fight you on that point because we will agree to disagree.
No, get the facts. Get the facts. If you could come back with facts that say that Yawa workers are paid less than Petrotrin workers, because OWTU represents both. You can't.
Yeah, but in the end, they are also a profit-making entity. They are private sector, but also in addition to that, you look at the working conditions. You also look at the time. There are a number of issues that the skill set of the workers. But this is not the issue we're discussing.
But you can't put out information. If we're not discussing that, don't discuss it. But you can't put out information that is not correct in the public domain, because that creates a perception which says that the problem is that it is a workers' problem, and that is not the
So whose
the truth
problem
of the
is
matter.
it, Dave?
Historically, it has been a governance problem in terms of political interference and bad management decisions.
And we can agree on that.
Okay, fine. Now, there are other issues that clearly, in terms of the model, have to be addressed. So that, yes, oil production, the failure of successive boards of management and governments to increase domestic production of crude has impacted negatively on the refinery. Okay? That is a fact. The issue of taxes, for example, Petrotrin gets taxed at a tax rate that no other company pays. So they're paying what? It's 55%? They're paying 55% out of a processing operation, which is the refinery.
Okay.
Whereas a processing plant like Yara and the others don't pay that.
They pay normal corporation
They pay
tax,
normal of 25%. Okay, so Petrotrin, so when you say Petrotrin is owing taxes, that is true, but Petrotrin's tax rate is higher than everybody else's. Because it was seen, because it's a state company, it could be seen as a cash cow. And so you take out as much money out of Petrotrin and therefore don't leave enough money for reinvestment in the operations.
Right, and David,
then it runs into trouble and then you say, well, close it down.
Okay, and I understand we are here as a result of successive bad decisions for decades. We can agree on that. I am not saying that it's the UNC or the PNM. I think decades of inefficient decisions.
And it's a national problem, and therefore we have to have a proper discussion about what is the best solution for Trinidad and Tobago.
What would you have done, and when would you do it? In 2019, in August of 2019, when the bond is due for calling and it's going to impact even more significantly on our ratings?
It should have been done 10 years ago.
Okay.
But that having been said, I spent many hours being part of this committee, and we came up with recommendations in June of 2017. And I want to say this because the Energy Subcommittee of Cabinet, chaired by the Prime Minister, disrespected members of this committee, Mrs. Helen Drayton, myself, and Gregory Marchand, who were the three members in the country. Mr. Selvin Lash is a member of the Energy Subcommittee, so he was inside the meeting, sat down in the office of the Prime Minister in the lobby for 2.5 hours to present this report. We were called in, Mrs. Drayton had to leave. 5 minutes after we went in, the Prime Minister said, you have to leave to go and tour some flooded area. So that is just to say that as far as the Cabinet was concerned, all this work that was done was really not important.
Okay.
They had a plan and an agenda
My
quite separate and apart, which ESPN and them are implementing.
My question remains, David, if not now, you said 10 years ago, okay, but we don't have the luxury of a time machine and going 10 years back. So then when would you have done it, and what would you have done?
We would have done it certainly coming out of this report last year. We would have had the company split up into separate business units. We'd have ensured that the board was separated from political interference, that board members would have been chosen on the basis of stakeholder consultations, including people like the Energy Chamber and so on, so that persons would not have been there with any political or cabinet interference. We would have then ensured that you had the right management people in place. There would have been discussions with the union to get productivity up, to cut out inefficiencies and waste and so on, so you get your costs down. The other elements of restructuring would have then enabled us to go to the country and say, listen, this is a country problem. The benefits to getting Petrotrin right would benefit the country. There's excess liquidity in the financial system right now. There's $3 billion in US dollar accounts in the banking system in Trinidad and Tobago. There's other financial liquidity in the thing. Let us organize to ensure there's a national investment in Petrotrin that would yield benefits down the road. Dealt with procurement so that, for example, in Trinidad, you wouldn't have the huge costs of boat crewing because one contractor has all the contracts for boat crews down in Trinidad. We'd have dealt with a whole range of issues, increasing bunkering, getting production up. There's
we don't have the luxury of time, David.
No, I'm just saying, there's a mobile offshore platform sitting down in Point Lisas for the last several years, which put in place down in Soldado Fields will get Trinidad production up by 5,000 to 10,000 barrels a day within a 3-month period. You know what that would do to Petrotrin's bottom line? Why is that sitting down for the last, 2 or 3 years?
Carol, I know I want to ask you, if you might ask them a question, what would you have done differently? And
I just want to add one point to this, because I noted before that there was this issue about Petrotrin requiring $25 billion injection and if it had to continue the refinery operating. And I didn't understand that. I did not think, I don't know where that figure came from. I suspect the $25 billion that we are referring to is for the entire Petrotrin, including the E&P operations.
It includes things like asset integrity, which is not to be done today for today.
And you see what I'm saying, that we have not taken all the cost factors into consideration. Okay, so you shut down the refinery, you don't sell it. You have to decommission that entire plant. Even when it comes to asset integrity, offshore facilities, the Trinma assets themselves, that requires asset and capital injection. None of this decision today does not improve or in any way alleviate any of those problems or address this particular issue. So coming back to what should be the solution in this particular case, we are now talking about 40,000 barrels of oil that will now have to go to the international market. It cannot go into the region.
25,000 because you said they're only going to...
No. You have to sell this 40,000.
Okay. All the domestic production
has to go to the international market. It can't go into the Caribbean, in my humble view. I don't see it is going to go into Venezuela, so it has to find a place in the international market. At what price? The market for that 40,000 barrels was the refinery. And at least at that point in time, you were able to add value to the products that you are able to produce and sell, the refined products. You were able to sell that in the Caribbean, and they still had premium market prices, from what I understood, in the Caribbean.
Yes.
I'm saying again, if I go back to that $684 million operating loss, I'm not taking the financing cost, because the financing cost will continue to exist.
Yeah, it will go on.
Right? So that is $684 million. Are you telling me all the suggestions that have been made in these various reports could not have been used, those recommendations, to bring down that cost? I feel it could have. The issue then, therefore, and I know that we have to wrap up, the issue, therefore, is this the best decision? If you analyze and take the wider implications to the economy of Trinidad and Tobago, I am not sure that this is exactly what. And I think we need a discussion right now on the debt profile for this country. Because I think what has happened is that they have tried to address the debt profile for Trinidad and Tobago, and a balance sheet, they use a balance sheet solution and not necessarily trying to fix the economy of Trinidad and Tobago.
David,
yes,
your closing comments on this. I know that we have disagreed many times in this interview this morning.
Yes, and these days, today I'm less quiet and so on, because I feel very agitated on it, agitated in the sense that all this work went in, and it has just been thrown out the window. It's not just my work, and because you see, the persons on the board were part of this work, and they have to come and say, we were part of this, and what we said, we disagree with. But they're too dishonest to say that. So for just the asset integrity, we could have had a national effort, reconstruction effort, with all those service providers to ramp up their capacity, idle skills,
implications for the economy.
To get the asset integrity of Petrotrin up to standard. That would create growth in the economy. It would create jobs, because after the plant in Labre stops being constructed, there's no more activity in the energy sector.
I did ask about that. You said there are plans in the pipeline to pick up the slack. But clearly you don't believe what... I heard that. You clearly don't believe. Mrs. Radwich, in 10 seconds, your closing comments on this matter, obviously a contentious issue.
My problem with this is that the government has not been, and the board of Petrotrin has not been very open and transparent with respect to this particular decision. We are calling for full disclosure of all the reports and studies that have been done with respect to this and the recommendations proffered. And in that particular issue, we are calling for a national discussion on this issue by all the various experts. And I'm saying this is because it is important for the economy of Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, tomorrow we're going to have the board of Petrotrin on the Morning Brew, and we will discuss this issue and so much more as we...